All right. Good to see you guys in the chat here, guys. Fantastic. We're going to get right into it. It is October 11th. Been pretty good, Chop City. Thanks so much for stopping in. Hopefully you are excited about this coming in here today, or if you're just here to lurk, very happy to have you. Always happy to have people in the live chat as well. Feel free to post questions. We're going to be talking about a few different things here today, mostly the Hinge as our main movement coming up next. But really excited. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'm happy to answer live questions as well, and we can make sure those get into the YouTube edit. So again, very happy to have you here. Been really well. It is a exceptionally sunny October, which is like kind of good, kind of bad. It's not supposed to be this warm here in Western Washington this time of year, but it's very nice. It's very comfortable. The mornings are cool. The evenings are warm, and it's delightful. But I also know that we are due for some rain. So that's all right. Let's get it going here, guys. Welcome to the Healthy Humans podcast. This is episode number 11 total. So we are officially on the 5th episode of season 2. I am recording via Twitch, so if you guys are watching currently, which we've got a couple of you guys in the chat, all those heroes lurking and listening, asking questions, hanging out, all that fun stuff. But you guys can find me at Finley the Dog Gaming. This is where I stream a variety of different games, hoping to get some cool stuff and content coming out for you guys here soon. There's some fun stuff coming out this week, and this is also where I do the live version of the podcast. This is where I get most of my content actually out, and so you guys can actually listen to it and watch it later as well. And if my dogs do anything goofy, you guys get to see it live here, because not always, but sometimes those will get edited out, depending on how loud the dogs are as far as audio recording goes. So that's always super fun. But we're very excited to start this off. Really thankful for everyone who's listening in here, guys. The more and more we do this, the more support I've gotten from you guys, whether or not that's people lurking in the chat or that is people even just going through and just retweeting like different posts and actually going through and listening to everything. Like, you guys are the MVPs. You guys make this worth it, because again, if you've ever made content that's not just live content, you know that quite a bit of like producing, writing, editing, and all those extra steps go into projects like this. And again, this is not a paid project. This is not my profession. That'd be really cool if it was, but it is not. So it takes a lot of effort to go through. I do work a full-time training career, which is quite grueling, which is going to be what I'm doing most of the day later today. And it's going to be a good time. So I just want to thank you guys so much for supporting everything. Just being here, being present, that is always super nice. If you guys are wondering what all these different logos are on the side here, this is actually where you can find us throughout the week. So we try to get everything uploaded the day after, or hopefully the night of this recording as well, if I am like really on top of everything, because again, sometimes load times are a little bit slow. But you guys are going to find the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and Google Podcasts. We are hoping to get more podcast platforms going soon, specifically Apple Podcasts and Amazon Podcasts, but we are not quite there yet, but we will get there eventually. You guys can also see the video version of this actually available on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. They do that now. They do video edits and video uploads, which is super cool. So you can choose whether or not you guys want to watch it in video or in audio. Whatever works. I don't necessarily mind whichever, but I know that the video watchers, I almost said listeners, but the video watchers are going to get you guys are going to see all the different graphics that we use, and you guys might get a chance to see the dogs show their wonderful faces as well. I hope you are all doing well, especially those who are in the chat so far. I see a couple of you guys, Chop City making himself known as well. Hope you guys are all doing super well. Let me know how you're doing in the chat. Love to hear from you guys. But let's keep on moving through. If you guys are interested in supporting the podcast right now, the best thing you can do is just watch, listen, like, comment, subscribe, all those things. None of those cost money. Please make sure you guys are doing that. That would be super helpful. We cover topics like health, nutrition, fitness, and overall wellness, and we've made about 10 episodes so far. So we're very excited to have you guys listening, and we're going to have some links throughout the video and in the description to audio and video versions of those. So hope you guys stick around. Today we are talking about the hinge. The hinge is the third and final way we move our body to interact with the ground. So it's a very, very important movement. It's actually one of my favorites. Here we've got a dumbbell Romanian deadlift being performed. Again, all these images are found via simplyfitness.com. Really, really helpful in getting those graphics because they do come in PNG form. So I can just slap them in there and the background shows through really nice, which is a fantastic way to get that in there. but it's one of my favorite movements. It's one of the strongest movements available to the human body, but it's also one of the most misunderstood as well. So we're going to get kind of right into that here in just a moment. Overall, what we're going to cover here, guys, is we're going to be looking at the hinge, the basics of the movement and its benefits, the difference between loading the hamstrings instead of the low back, common limitations, and loading patterns and progression. So we're going over actually quite a bit here today. So I'm hoping I won't get distracted too much, and we will be able to dive right in. Let's get into it. All right, first talking point here, guys, is we're going to talk about the basics and benefits of this movement. So the deadlift or the hinge, so I'll sometimes use those interchangeably, hopefully not too many times to cause confusion, but we'll just refer to it as the hinge. It is a hamstring, glute, and back builder. It uses those posterior chain muscles to basically get yourself closer to the ground, add load, then stand right back up. It's fantastic. There's multiple different variations, but most of these focus on the basics of that hinge. It's the idea that we're using the hips to actually send them backwards, and then using those hamstrings and glutes to drive everything back forward up into that standing position. Now, knees are going to usually stay slightly bent while you guys are here. The Romanian or the straight leg deadlift, as is portrayed in this graphic here, is actually a less used version because it does emphasize hamstring flexibility the most, but it's a little bit tougher. I find that I like doing the conventional deadlift a little bit, which just allows for a little bit extra knee flexion, especially if you are trying to get these weights all the way to the ground. Most of us don't necessarily have the hamstring flexibility to allow those weights to come all the way through without then bending the low back and compromising that as well. One of the things I do want to talk about as well is the difference between the hinge and the squat. So we talked about the squat first, and then we went over lunges, and then we went over hinges, which is what we're doing today. The squat, as we can see up here, is a mostly up and down movement. The hips do go back slightly. They do start off that movement in that hinge, but they are mostly just driving down towards the ground and then right back up. Whereas the hinge, we're actually focusing on moving the hips backwards from their initial position and then forwards again. So that's the biggest difference here. It's horizontal movement in the hips versus vertical movement in the hips. If you guys have any questions about more intricacies and things like that, always feel free to ask questions as well. What's up, Finn? You just hanging out? Here you go. He's making himself known. He's like, I want to be in the shot, but not too much. All right. Then we're going to go into our classic, which is our joint check. So we want to make sure that as you guys are going through, there's a lot of different joints that we're checking out into this position. First, we're looking at the feet. We just want to make sure that the feet are usually about hip distance apart. You can have a wider stance, which is usually referred to as a sumo deadlift, but that's a very, very wide stance. It's something that I don't usually spend a ton of time doing myself, but it is a version of that you can do. And then we're looking at the knees. I usually recommend having a slight bend in the knees, not only because it does give us a higher amount of mobility into that hinge, but it does promote circulation throughout the lower body as well. Then we're looking at the hips, we're looking at the glutes. Really, we're focusing on hinging at that movement. We want those hips to be going back towards the wall and then forward again. That is really, really important. Then we're going to be looking at the low back. We want a nice gentle curve in that low back. We don't want that low back to be pressing out away from the spine. That's usually when people think of this movement, they think of, oh, I'm lifting with the back as opposed to lifting with the hamstrings. And that's usually key. Then we have the upper back check as well. So when we're looking here, we're usually actually looking at the scapula and the lats. So a little bit of joint check, a little bit of muscle check, because we want those scapula pulled in towards the spine. If you don't know what a scapula is, that's just what we call your shoulder blade. It's the anatomical term. But we want those nice and engaged. We want those elbows kind of turned in, making sure that the lats are engaged and everything is having a good time. And then I also have another arrow pointing to the chin here as well. A lot of times people will tend to really pull their neck back so when they're in this hinge position, so they actually have their eyes forward. Most people want to do this to actually check on their posture while they're going through this movement, and it's actually better to keep a nice straight line from hip all the way to the top of the head as you're going through to keep that neck nice and relaxed. Next thing we're going to be talking about here, guys, is loading the hamstrings versus the low back. So we very briefly talked about this, and it's all about mobilization and stabilization of the right areas and making sure you have a strong starting posture and making sure you're including some bracing as well. So when we talk about the difference between mobilization and stabilization, there's actually both of those happening at the same time. Hey, Theo. He's like, oh, I bored. I should bored dog. So when we're talking about mobilization, the hamstrings are going to be doing most of the work here. They are stretching while we are stabilizing the low back. Again, we kind of talked about the idea with lifting with your legs versus lifting with your back. You don't want to lift with your back in this position. That's not what we want to do. What we do want is those hamstrings to be taking most of the load. Now, to do this properly, starting posture is key. We want to make sure that the shoulders are pulled back, and I'll usually tell people rotate the elbows in as well. So if you're holding a bar, we usually tell people the cue is to like imagine you're bending the bar in half. You're not going to actually bend the bar in half unless you're like the Hulk, which props to you, but we want to make sure that we are engaging those muscle groups. That's going to keep the lats themselves, or your latissimus dorsi. If you don't know what that is, it's the giant muscle that's in your back that actually helps perform pull-ups, do basic pulling motions, all those fun things. But if that muscle is engaged, the spine is going to have a really hard time moving out of position. This is really good. It puts the spine into that set or neutral position, and then we're ready to brace. So once we have the back engaged, then we can brace with the core as well, basically giving you an entire sheath of protection all the way around the spine from forward to back. That's going to be the most important. So once you have that brace, I usually tell people breathe in, brace, keeping that core nice and tight, and then go through that movement, moving about the hips, sending those hips backwards, and then bringing them forward, and then really, really focusing on the hips and shoulders rising simultaneously until the bar or the dumbbell or whatever load you're using passes your knees. That's when you guys want to make sure you are going through that position and going from that hinge to that standing posture. Next thing we're going to talk about is common limitations. I want to go over this because there are a lot of things and misconceptions with this move, especially the hinge itself. Again, people think this is a lifting with your back exercise when it's not. It's really focusing on levering the hamstrings, not the low back, but it helps stabilize the low back. So it does actually use those muscles. But again, they're using them to stabilize, not to produce movement. That's the key. So a lot of times I find that if somebody has really, really tight hamstrings, they're going to have a hard time mobilizing and going through this range of motion. That is okay. We'll go over hopefully some solutions to all of this as well moving forward. The next one is usually low back pain. And low back pain is one of the most common and the most expensive diagnoses in the United States. We spend more money treating low back pain than we do almost anything else. And that is not good. That means a lot of people suffer with low back pain. And in my experience, low back pain is mostly preventable. Again, not entirely. We don't like to speak in absolutes because there's always exceptions to the rule, but mostly preventable. And it has to do with what people do throughout their day, how they move, and how they interact with their environment. And then obviously exercise and movement throughout the day as well. Another thing I will usually see is if somebody has lat weakness, so that latissimus dorsi, if that muscle is too weak, so if somebody doesn't spend a lot of time training that muscle group, then they will usually have a harder time actually holding the spine in place, and that stinks. So we'll usually focus on training that area as well. What we refer to when we're looking at all of those different muscles along the posterior end of the body. So if we're looking at the calves, hamstrings, glutes, low back, up, mid, and upper back, we refer to all of this together as the posterior chain. So that is really, really important to make sure we are checking on all of those, because a weakness in one side might lead to an overcompensation in the other. So we want to make sure that is all there. Another common limitation is more psychological than anything else. It is really going to be focusing on lack of experience, because people see this as a lifting exercise that is primarily using the back. And they're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't have the experience doing this. And so they usually don't go through it. Next thing we can go over is voluntary contraction. That is the ability to squeeze the muscles as hard as you can voluntarily. Whenever you go through a hinge or a squat, you're always using muscles, but are you truly using the muscle to its highest degree? And so voluntary contraction is a skill that needs practice just like anything else. And so we make sure we go on with that as well. Next thing we're going to be covering is movement progression. Movement progression is going to be nice and simple in these ones. it's really going to be going through and adding load. So starting off very, very light and then moving heavier as you go through different movements. Now, finding what kind of like hinge and deadlift or whatever variation works best for you is usually key here. So movement progression might not even happen until we find whatever works best for you. And then we're also going to vary your equipment as well. So some people like to use kettlebells or dumbbells, barbells, hex bars. We might use a platform so everything is raised up. There's a lot of different ways to do this movement, but it's all about finding like what works best for you first and then starting to add more weight as we continue that movement. One of the things I really focus on as well is modifying that range of motion to accommodate the hamstrings and low back. So if somebody does have tight hamstrings and they have low back pain, that's when we want to really make sure that we are reducing that range of motion when necessary, because some people can't get all the way to the ground without pain or tightness in the hamstrings. This is very, very common in individuals over 60, not being able to reach down to the ground without their back hurting, and that is no good. That is one of the things I work with most often, is actually performing a hinge in the elderly population. That is no good. We can't have our older generations not be able to perform a movement, because eventually that's going to be us, right? So we want to make sure that we are perfecting these moves now and practicing them so that as we get older, and aging is an inevitable process, we are ready to face that degradation of time with grace and hopefully good posture as well. A lot of the times here, guys, it's all about starting light, progressing heavier. Don't be that person that feels like they want to go as heavy as possible as soon as possible. You really don't need to worry about putting as much load on that bar as quickly as possible. Now, deadlifts in particular, you'll see a lot of people do these very, very heavy at gyms. It's a very, very strong movement. It uses huge muscle groups, but it's something that does take a little bit of practice to do. It's not a conventional move that people are used to doing. Come here, Thea. Come here. I know. Oh, he's like whining because he hears me talking to you guys, and he just thinks he's not getting enough attention. So I'm going to be giving him some scritches downstairs underneath the camera, so that way he's a happy boy. That's the fun thing about recording these live, is the dogs are always like, oh, you're doing something. Time to wake up and ask for attention. But make sure that you guys are really starting off light, perfect the movement first, and then add some load as you go through. All right, let's move into the next one. All right, today we're just kind of keeping it nice and simple here, guys. I don't want to, again, wax eloquently too much on everything. I want to make sure that I'm kind of keeping up on my workout updates with you guys as well. I did get my new shoes. Actually, let me snag these here really quick. So I got my new Hokas. I've already put a decent amount of mileage into them already. These are the Kiwana series. Really what you're looking for when you guys get a running shoe or a workout shoe is you want to find something that, also not a sponsor, but you guys want to find something that has the right fit for your foot and for your activity. So for example, this has a decent platform on it. So when I'm running, this is going to give me, it has a decent score on its plush value. And it also has a decent arch support as well. I have pretty flat arches, so this is going to actually help keep that updated, so that way my foot doesn't roll in while I'm striking the ground and then rolling off with that toe strike. I'm mostly just breaking these in right now, but excited to get some more miles in throughout the week. I've already put in about 6 to 8 miles on these already. In my first couple of wears. My hip feels a lot better, my knees feel a lot better, but these do have a pretty high platform, so they are harder to lift in. So that's something that is a little bit of a drawback. Here, I'll let the dog out really quick, because he's whining. All right, dogs are going outside. Fantastic. Again, that's the fun part about recording live, is when you have 2 high-energy dogs, they just want to be part of the action. Last week I did have to take a sick day. We are experiencing a ton of smoke here in Western Washington, and I had a little bit of a scratchy throat, and it's just kind of like life nowadays. It's like when you get sick, you kind of like don't try to push through it. I think it's always best to really watch what you're doing. But I did end up having to take that sick day, which did put me back just a little bit. Again, my goal is to get about 3,000 points worth of exercise. I use my MyZone monitor to monitor all of that. And we've gone over in the last episode about how we monitor those points. So it gives you points based on your intensity of your exercise. So the higher your heart rate, the more points you get. A white zone, which is like the first basically 50% of your predicted max heart rate zone, doesn't give you any points, doesn't give you any calories. You're basically in the resting zone. It gives you like 1 calorie per minute, which is almost nothing. So it doesn't really count what you're doing if you are in that first zone, which is the white zone. Your next zone, which is the 50 to 59%, is your gray zone. You get 1 point. 60 to 69, nice, is 2 points per minute. 70 to 79 is 3 points per minute, and then 80 and above is 4 points per minute. So I'm hoping to get 100 points per day minimum. And right now I'm only 51 points behind. And that was with taking a sick day and a day off. So actually it was a total of 2 days off last week. So I'm catching up pretty well. Actually, by the time this gets uploaded, I will probably have got back on track plus about 50 to 75 points. I usually try to work out closer to 200 per day, so that way I can kind of make up for not working out on the weekends as well. But that's going pretty well here, guys, and I'm hoping to get some more graphs and stuff updated as well. I'm a huge numbers person. I really like tracking my numbers with like my workouts and my volume and things like that. So hoping to show you guys how I am improving on some of my different lifts and running scores and things like that as well. Because again, the more information I can share with you guys, the more you guys can kind of take that and apply it to your own workouts as well. We'll get into viewer questions coming up next here, guys. One of the big ones that I got is this week, actually from a couple of different people, is how do I get into the gym when I experience exercise anxiety? Now, it depends on what your experience with anxiety is. If it's like an extreme anxiety, then we might keep your advice pretty simple. But if it's a light anxiety, like, oh, this is just a new environment, things like that, then we might vary up that advice a little bit. But usually the first thing that I will advise is your homework, if you do struggle with that anxiety, is to just get to the gym. It is just show up. You don't even necessarily have to walk in. Get dressed, get your workout gear together, drive to the gym, stay in the parking lot for 10 minutes, and then leave. That is a really, really good habit. It gets you more familiar with there. It creates that sense of belonging that you're like, oh, this isn't a completely new place. You're starting to build familiarity with the location. That's going to be most important. And then once you have developed that skill, then it's going in. It might be going in with your workout gear, getting onto a tread, a bike, or an elliptical, something super simple for 5 minutes, and then leaving. Doesn't have to be a crazy hard workout. And then just like we do any other exercise or anything like that, we're going to train your brain just like it's a muscle. Then you continue progressing that load essentially. Then you start getting into the weights or the machines, whatever it might be. Reach out to some professionals for help. A trainer will help walk you through different like free weight exercises. So if you're like, hey, I have no idea how to do this, which is kind of contributing to my anxiety, they'll help walk you through it all. So that's usually what I would say. Start small, build to bigger, take your own time, and be kind to yourself. That's my biggest thing there. Next thing I do want to talk about here, guys, is our Patreon resources. Now, there's a lot of different things I have available on the Patreon page, and we're continuing to come out with more as well. But right now we're going over our foundations course. So once we finish the foundations, that will be up on Patreon, so you can have access to different workout plans that will touch on all of those different subjects. It will also go over a progression plan. I'll have different things that I call kind of the rules of the bar. So different kind of rules and tips that you can use when exercising that don't necessarily have to do with just barbell training, but workouts in general. And I do come up with custom workout plans as well. So if you guys are on there, please make sure you guys are subscribing to that if you have the ability. That does cover my entire content portfolio as well. So it supports all the different projects we do. So let me know if you guys have any questions about that as well. We will have a link in the YouTube description for that page. And we'll try to get a Linktree link in there at the end of this stream as well. So today was kind of a short one here, guys. I wanted to keep it nice and short and sweet. If you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to shoot them over to me. You can DM me on any of the social media platforms I am on. I go by Finley the Dog on several different platforms, Finley and Theo Entertainment on YouTube, and we go by the Healthy Humans Podcast on Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and Spotify. Very happy to have you guys all here. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, the best way to currently help us out is to just watch these episodes. Leave comments with questions. Give us your feedback and your own experiences as well. We want to hear from you guys. So right now you can find us on all those different places. This is still a fairly new podcast. So if you guys do that search, sometimes it might take a little bit of scrolling to get there, but you guys can also find the podcast in some of my pinned tweets as well. We want to get a lot of questions from you guys. I would love to get some AMA episodes or Ask Me Anything episodes so that you guys can get a multitude of questions answered. You guys can email us at healthyhumanspodcast@gmail.com. Throughout the week, you can find me at Finley the Dog Gaming on Patreon. And again, that's our tag for Patreon, Finley the Dog Gaming. You can also find at that same tag, you can find me on Instagram and here, which is Twitch, and Finley the Dog 736 on Twitter. You can find me at YouTube at Finley and Theo Entertainment. Considering going through, liking, and watching those videos. That watch time is super helpful. From our last checkpoint, and this is one of my favorite parts, is actually going over the world map. We have a lot of different locations here, guys, and we do have some new listeners as well. So, from our last checkpoint, we have listeners in Washington, Ohio, California, Texas, Oklahoma, Indiana, Florida, North Carolina, and New Jersey. International viewers in the UK, Sweden, Belgium, Spain, India, Czech Republic, and Australia. We did get a new place to mark on the map this week, and it is the state of Oregon. So you guys can see over here on the west coast of the United States, we actually have all three of those dots. So we have the entire west coast covered. Very excited about that. So if you guys have any friends in states or countries that you guys know and you guys want to help me fill out this map, we'd be super excited about it. So that way we can get healthy information to everyone who needs it. I am only one person, but that's the nice thing about consuming podcast entertainment is we can share it with a lot of different people. Just remember here, guys, all the information discussed on this podcast does not constitute medical advice, and you should always consult your physician before starting an exercise program. Whenever I finish a session, I always finish off with 3 rules. 1, to make sure you guys are moving around. Movement is medicine. The more you do that, the better. Just don't overdo it. Next, make sure you guys are drinking plenty of water. And finally is make sure you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.